And good afternoon. Welcome into Market Talk here on this Friday, May 27th. Great to have you with us. Thanks for making us part of your day once again as we head to a long holiday weekend. I'm your host, Jesse Allen. Thanks for joining us. Find us online, markettalkag.com, our home on the web. You can find our radio affiliates there, our streaming sources, the latest news of agriculture, and much more. It's all online, markettalkag.com. Well, here on the show today, we got to take a look back at this wild week in the markets. We saw some good strength in corn and in wheat today, with the bean market a little bit mixed ahead of Memorial Day. Let's discuss all of it. Let's say good afternoon to our good friend Chad Hart with Iowa State University joining us here today. Chad, it's always great to talk with you, sir. How you been?
Oh, I'm doing well, Jesse. How are you today?
I am doing great. I'm looking forward to a holiday weekend with maybe some brats and burgers on the grill and sitting down and relaxing. And I think a lot of farmers would maybe be thinking about the same, except there's plenty in the northwestern Corn Belt still trying to get a crop in. I know that's been a topic in the markets here this past week and a half to 2 weeks, and still remains that way. But just a lot in the trade today, and it feels like maybe some concern about the far northwestern plains and the northern plains with corn and spring wheat maybe losing some acres there. Really helped to drive the market trade today. As you kind of looked at everything here on this Friday, what was your thoughts there? A lot of strength in the wheat and corn markets.
There definitely was, and yeah, I would say it's the combination of the lack of planting progress that we've seen up there because of the wet conditions. And then I'm going to flip around and also point to when you look at the long range forecast that we're seeing for the growing season, especially as we look at the western side of the corn belt, it looks like it's going to be a highly challenging weather year this year. So whether it's the delays in planting or the threat of that drought working its way back east again, I think both those things played into today's markets.
Well, and I think as well, obviously this wheat market has been under a microscope here for the last, we'll call it month, but we've seen, big run ups there with the Russia Ukraine situation. And then traders this week, a lot of them funds maybe took some profit because they're like, oh, Russia might help open, channels to get Ukraine grain out, and a lot of skepticism around that. And I think traders maybe realized on Friday that it's probably not going to happen, but yet we look at the global tightening of the wheat balance sheet, and then you couple that with the weather issues in spring wheat and the dryness in the southern plains, and this wheat market really has what feels like a bullish story behind it overall as we head into the month of June, Chad.
It definitely does, and as you say, it's got a myriad of factors behind it. Between you know, you're looking at Russia and Ukraine, and even if they do get something, say, settled over the next week or two, how quickly can that really come to pass? When you're looking at the planting progress in that area of the world as well, I mean, let's face it, it's hard to plant in a war zone. And then you combine that with the weather stresses we see, especially as we look at the longer term forecast, not only here in the US, but looking down in South America and across Australia. And it does create this recipe for strength in the wheat market as we're looking forward.
Definitely does. And, I think about some of the prices we're seeing in the price action, spring wheat closing above $13 on Friday. So poking back up there towards some highs. And, some folks in the trade have pointed to the wheat markets maybe being a bit of a leader here as we get into the summer months. What would your thought be on that? Have you seen anything with charts, et cetera, that would really point to the wheat markets maybe being the leader in grains here for a time?
Well, I think I'll argue it this way. I would argue it's been a leader here for the past couple of months as well, and it comes back to this idea of that we know the world wheat market is really tight right now. We're seeing that tightness occur at a time when the world is really searching for a lot of feed, especially as we look at the livestock industries worldwide. And with wheat being short, that's helping drag corn along as well. And so it's this, I'd call it this overall demand for feed right now, which is creating the situation where, yeah, spring wheat can lead off. And I think we'll see some, if you will, residual strength coming through for winter wheat as we look forward to the next crop going into the fall.
Looking at the corn market as well, you mentioned some wheat pulling the corn market ahead. December corn closing right at 7:30 on Friday. Old crop July up to 777. And we've got some rumors in the trade about China buying corn for September, but also the China Brazil news earlier this week as something that was maybe a weight on the corn market. We kind of digested it here, but looking at corn overall, I feel like we'll run up in corn and then we'll kind of come back down a little bit and then we go back up and down. We're kind of just seesawing and finding what appears to be a range in this market right now, Chad.
We definitely have, and I would say that's the deal. When I look at the three major crops, I would say corn is sort of caught in the yo-yo between what's happening with wheat and what's happening with soybeans. You bring up the idea of when we're looking at the demand for corn right now, I'd say it remains fairly robust. We're seeing week over week gains when we look at ethanol. Exports in general have been, let's call it strong enough. They've held up with these higher prices. And that's why the China rumor, can spark a little bit of a rally here because if we can add some additional exports, going out to China, that definitely does help put a little more emphasis, or a little bit of oomph under the market as we move through the next few weeks.
Very, very true. Well, and I think farmers as well, it comes back to the planting issues and some of them maybe looking at some of the cash bids. We're seeing impressive cash basis out there for corn right now. But on the flip side, some farmers may be worried about marketing too much ahead because they don't know how much corn they're going to get in the ground. We know we saw some crop insurance states come to pass here this week, yet some farmers, they're still going to plant after those insurance dates to get a crop in the ground, even with a bit of a yield drag. But one has to wonder how someone navigates their corn marketing right now, just with all these factors out there, especially with great prices being seen.
Well, that's the deal. I think when we're looking here, I'm going to have to say it depends on your location. As I'm looking towards north and west, as we mentioned, the planting delays there really bring up some strong concerns. Will I even get that crop in the ground as we're looking forward? When I'm looking at, say, Iowa and the Eastern Corn Belt, though, we've caught up a lot. So that gives us more security to try to be more aggressive in forward marketing that. A lot of producers across the country have purchased crop insurance in order to help support them in case they do get a little bit rambunctious, if you will, with their marketing there. But I would say probably the biggest thing I'm looking at there is when we're thinking about this corn market, the challenge here, I think, is going to be now that we've got the vast majority of it in the ground, it all came in basically the last couple of weeks, which means we're looking at very narrow windows in terms of pollination. And when we get the black layer at the back end, and so we're going to be a much more weather sensitive market this year than compared to, say, a typical year where, yeah, weather's always important. But I think this year, even more crucially, because of the delays sort of stacking this crop up all to be at, reaching the same stages across the nation at basically the same time.
Soybean market lagged behind a little bit today. We saw it surge on Thursday, getting some rumors in the trade about massive basis bids for beans in the Eastern Corn Belt here today. And, we think about yesterday's surge at the expense of, say, corn. Some of those intermarket spreads were unwound. Today, it seemed like we saw a little bit of spreading just within soybeans between old and new crop, a new contract high in July beans. Yet we came off that high, fairly quiet day there. What's your thoughts on this soy complex overall, considering products in their meal and bean oil as well as we head into the month of June, Chad?
Well, that's the deal. I think when we're looking here again, there was some concerns about the planting blaze, but I think those are being mitigated now, and it's more this issue of trying to figure out what's the demand structure going to look like. As we look at the beans themselves, export demand has been very strong as we're looking out there. China has been leading that charge, and that's what's leading, especially that old crop strength that we've seen on the bean charts as we look over time. I think looking forward, though, it's this, if you will, this push pull between meal and oil as we look out there. There's been a lot of movement on the oil side over the past 18 months, a lot of that being driven by biofuels and especially the development of renewable diesel. Those if you will, that continues as we look forward here, as we continue to see more of those refineries come online. I think that's going to help pull oil price, or keep oil prices very strong. And at the same time, too, we're finding some additional markets for our bean meal. And so that's been supportive as well. And so I think you're seeing the entire complex in a really good spot right now when it comes to demand.
It does seem that way, and I think it's something, we gotta look at the old crop balance sheets too. I mean, we've already hit USDA's export target for this year, and we're starting to see new crop pick up as well on some of those export sales. So, I think continue to watch China, and of course, the US-China relationship is something we always talk about, we always watch, and one has to wonder what that relationship's gonna look like going through the summer and beyond here, Chad. But again, obviously, China is such a big player for exports.
Yeah, and I think in this case, given especially the uncertainty that has been created by the Ukrainian war, you're going to see the trade relationship, I would say, continue to remain fairly strong between the U.S. and China, even while the rhetoric is picking up again. Much like we saw, I would say, back in 2016 and 17, when you think about the relationship there, we were debating a lot, between the two countries, but there were still some very strong trade flows between the two countries as well when it came to agriculture.
Watching as well the macro markets and energy stock market, of course, inflation concerns there. We saw this week USDA's May food price outlook saw a lot of those percentages rise. A lot of worry about inflation in money in the stock market, energies as well. Crude oil kind of leveling off around 114, 115 here to head into the holiday weekend. Summer driving season ahead. Just overall, looking at the macro picture, what's your thoughts on where things stand regarding inflation and its overall impact on everything with our daily lives and in our commodity markets, Chad?
Well, I guess I'll put it this way. I think what we're seeing right now is that this inflation is likely to persist for a little while here. And you brought up some key points about how, while we continue to see prices rise, we also haven't seen a lot of aggregate changes in demand. Typically, you can think of inflation as, okay, we continue to demand the same amount even as prices go higher. And that's exactly what's been happening now. When I'm looking differentially here, I would say, what we've seen with inflation is it's definitely impacting our lower income consumers much more. When you think about the basics of food and fuel, that tends to hit harder for those that make less. But when I'm looking in aggregate across the nation, what we're seeing is demand remains strong despite the high prices. And we're not seeing a lot of, let's call it the average consumer, backing off of those purchases because of these higher prices.
Very, very true. Good things to consider there. I want to touch on livestock as well before we run out of time, Chad. Fairly quiet on Friday, more typical pre holiday weekend trade in the livestock markets. Not a whole lot happening in cattle or hogs. Hogs first, though. Thursday we had a big up day there, and we've had some big up days in this hog market after going down and maybe finding a bottom. What is your thoughts with lean hogs here around the 110, 111 level in the front months, and just the overall tone in the hog trade right now?
Well, I'd say the hog trade, it sort of reflects what we were talking about with the inflation discussion just a second ago. The idea is we've got fairly strong demand domestically as we're looking here. And as we move into the summer, not only driving season, but grilling season, that's helping create some nice support underneath the pork market. We've struggled a little bit on the export side over the past year, but at least the last few weeks have shown us that no, we've still got some international demand out there as well. It's firming up, if you will, as we're moving forward.
Cattle trade, our cattle ranchers, they've been watching this market kind of come back down a little bit, almost to maybe try and find a bottom. Cash trade has been, a bit of a struggle. A lot of forward contracted cattle here with just a lot in the feedlots right now. But I've thrown out this thought to a few folks in cattle. It feels somewhat similar to hogs in that maybe we're coming down to find the bottom before we start to move this market back higher again as we get into the summer and into the fall. Would you agree with that, or what's your thoughts in cattle right now?
I would agree with that, and I would say the futures market is already ahead of us on that. The idea is as we look out there, we are seeing strengthening prices for cattle as we look deeper into the year on the future side. And it's reflecting that, a couple of things here. We do have a lot of cattle, in the feedlots right now. A fair number of them have been pushed there because of the drought and the conditions we've got and had for the past couple of years, especially in the western US. So that's forced a good chunk of cattle here into the mix in the first half here of 2022, but it also means there's an echo effect. As we get deeper into 2022 and into 2023, we're going to see much tighter beef supplies, and that definitely leads to higher beef prices as we're looking forward.
Something to keep an eye on for sure. Chad, always appreciate the insight. Any final thoughts you have for us ahead of the holiday weekend?
Well, like I say, I think in this case, what we're finding in during this holiday weekend is that a lot of folks are gearing up and getting out, wanting to enjoy this Memorial Day weekend, and that means all the trappings of we're traveling now. We're starting to get the grills out, get the meats going on those grills, and I think for our producers out there, that is providing some additional strength to these markets at a time when there are some factors that could be softening them, but right now, no, prices remain good almost across the board.
Definitely. Well, Chad, again, always great to talk with you, sir. And I appreciate the time. And thanks for joining us. And you enjoy your holiday weekend as well.
You too, as well.
Thank you very much. Chad Hart, a professor of economics, crop market specialist with Iowa State University, joining us today here on Market Talk. That's going to do it for the show on this Friday, May 27th. I'm your host, Jesse Allen, wishing you and yours a safe Memorial Day weekend.